Howdy, this is Mike. I'm in South Knoxville. This is a place that's been here about a year. It's called Frankenstein's. Go ahead and check it out. We have some merch in here, including a Space 1999 lunchbox, glasses, and a pancake mix. This is kind of a pancake house. It was a cool place. I just peeked inside. They were playing the Talking Heads, who I love, but I would get a copyright strike. Very eclectic place. Kind of a little punk rock, a little breakfast pancake house. Serve cocktails, coffee. Pretty neat. But the reason I stopped there is I'm on my way to Knoxville. We'll do a video today on whether or not the Frankenstein story, written by Mary Shelley, was somehow influenced by strange events in Knoxville. Yes, it's an urban legend that exists, that Frankenstein had its origins in Knoxville. So we'll go check it out today. We are here in Knoxville. That's the Gay Street Bridge. It's closed right now for repairs. And that's the Tennessee River. Now this section of river, they used to call it the Holston River. And the Holston would join the Little Tennessee River, and that's when it sort of became the Tennessee River. It's when the Holston merged with the Little Tennessee. Now, I guess because of just media being here covering football games and stuff, they just started calling it the Tennessee River. So now it is the Tennessee River. And apparently the Tennessee River begins where the Holston River runs into the French Broad River, or the French Broad River runs into the Holston River. It's about the same. We're at the Blunt Mansion Visitor Center. That's the historic Blunt Mansion over there. We'll do a video on that someday. That was actually the seat of government for not just this area, but much of the western United States, all the way to the Mississippi River at one point. Okay, we're at First Presbyterian Church in downtown Knoxville. We're just behind the Tennessee Theater. And the person responsible for the Knoxville Frankenstein legend is buried here in the churchyard. Many of the founders of Knoxville are buried here in this very historic cemetery. Our story begins here, at the grave of Reverend Stephen Foster, a university professor at East Tennessee College, what is now the University of Tennessee. Reverend Foster was a respected member of the community. He passed away at the young age of 35 during an epidemic. The bottom of the tombstone reads, "Mysterious are your ways, O Lord." Reverend Foster lived here, Knoxville was still really a frontier town. What could he have possibly done to inspire the story, the legend of Frankenstein? Well, it's an interesting tale. In 1868, a grave is discovered on the edge of town. No one knows who the grave belongs to until an old town sheriff says that it's a man he hung back in 1821. The sheriff, in fact, executed 2 men that day. The one whose grave had been found, and another man, a gentleman who was much younger, only 23 years old, named James White, and convicted of murder. And it said many of the young women in the crowd that day wept that such a young man should meet his end on the gallows. But it's what happened to James White after his execution that led to the story. The old man remembered that after the execution, James White's body was taken to the Second Presbyterian Church by none other than Stephen Foster. A man of science, Reverend Foster had decided to experiment on the body. He took it to the basement of the church and there attached it to some strange electrical devices and began to run electrical currents through the body. Several curious witnesses are said to have watched the experiments through the basement windows of the church. After several jolts of electricity were sent through the body, it said that it began to twitch and move. Ultimately, it opened an eye, and then began to breathe. Once, twice, 3 times. Alarmed, Reverend Foster threw the switch, cutting off the electricity and ending the experiment. Actually, biological experiments with electricity date back to the 18th century with Luigi Galvani. He created the science of galvanism, the art of applying electrical current to biological specimens, including humans. By 1801, the experiments were so common they were published in papers. All sorts of experiments, beginning with frogs, birds, then on to cattle, and yes, eventually humans, mostly from condemned prisoners. These experiments in galvanism created much excitement during the time, and if Reverend Foster had recreated some of those experiences in 1821, he would have simply been following some science that had been around for almost 3 decades. Mary Shelley was a fascinating person, very educated. She would have been very familiar with the experiments going on at the time, and her circle of friends, Lord Byron, and of course her eventual husband, Percy Shelley, would often discuss these things when they traveled about. Much has been written, published, films have been made about her writing of Frankenstein. It is a colossal work and one of the most analyzed works in all of English language literature. When Frankenstein was published in 1818, it created its sensation. Within a few years, it had been adapted for the stage, and there were many theatrical productions of it during the 19th century. Some of these would eventually have played in Knoxville at one point or the other. So, while it's fun to imagine that there might have been a connection to Knoxville, the reality is that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein 4 years before Reverend Foster's experiments. But there is one unanswered question. What did become of the body of James White?